Hey, hello everybody. Welcome to class 4 here. Go ahead and take your seats. One thing today, I am not using front row. That seems to be the cause of a lot of my problems. So only 50 people will be able to get in here. If you're in and somebody messages you, please let them know that it is being live streamed on YouTube as well, and they'll even be able to ask questions. I just posted, again, the link to the live stream in that Intro to MREs channel in the Discord. And that'll be, hopefully none of you will have to try to re-enter and not be able to or anything like that. But that's how you can watch this if somebody wants to, but they can't get in today. So, all right. So what we'll be talking about today is actors in more detail, and then we're going to go to some buttons as well. Start out with a final project reminder. I'm going to talk through this topic that kind of came up over the last week. Your local MRE servers when you set it up that way, and this would be for the LAN mode as well. More likely with the local host, but you might be surprised at some things that happened while you're running that. I just want to make sure everybody knows what's happening if something like that happens to them. Then we'll go back and pick up where we left off last week and start with the late joiner bug for attachments, which we're all familiar with if you've been to any of those parties in Alt Space. And you can see people's wings and other people can't, or vice versa. This kind of gives you a workaround for that as well. Then we'll talk about customizing actors a bit more. Then we'll start getting into the interactivity again a bit. That's when we'll start talking about buttons. All right, so again, final projects, just everybody, if you haven't come up with one already, please try to come up with a final project for the class. I think it'll be a lot of fun to have everybody, give everybody a chance to show off what they've been working on during the course of the class. And I think the Allspace community in general would love to see it too. So please try to think of one. We'll schedule it in the near future. I'm thinking I'd originally planned to stop this after 5 classes. With a couple shortened classes, I think I'm going to go ahead and add one. I hope you guys can make it. So it'll be a total of 6 at that point to try to cover everything. We'll get through it and then have the week after that probably have the big event to show off everybody's MREs. So. Okay, so this is one of the slides from class 1 where I was talking about the different ways of running MREs. And if you remember, one of them was that local host. The local server is another way it's called. It's a very convenient way in some ways. But one of the things we talked about there was, for instance, if you have a local host or local server running in a world, when a second user connects to it, they've got nothing to connect to, right? So they just, they in general will see, well, what you guys see off to your left here, right? That frowny face and the pondering guy, because it's trying to connect to something and not being able to. Well, there is another possibility though. Maybe that second user is in the class and you're just kind of hopping around and you've left your own local server running. Well, so when the server talks to one person, it's going to send back that local host address. Well, now you've actually got something of yours running like that. So you'll actually see your MRE running in their world, which is a little surprising at times, I know. But it's not, they can't see your MRE. They see theirs, you see yours. So you see different copies of this in the same world. You're seeing different MREs running at the same time, which can be a little confusing. So it's just kind of know that. And this is kind of going into a bit more detail about how that happens. So this is the activity diagram we walked through before. I've shortened it a little bit to make room for both cases here, but Dargon enters a world, he gets world data back, and in this case, a local host URL. So that's for the local MRE. So then it connects to Dargon's local host server, which connects to Dargon's app, which instructs it, starts it, and says user Dargon joined. So from the point of view of Dargon's localhost app, there's one user. And Scourge comes along a little later, does the same thing as before, enters the world. He gets the world data back. He gets the localhost URL back. This time, Of course, localhost means running on your computer. He's going to connect to his own localhost server. So it'll be a different MRE entirely that he'll see versus what Dargon will see. And then it'll go through the user joined, started. Oh, that should have, I'm sorry, that should have said construct there. I'll update that before I post it again, but that should have said the construct, the started, and then user joined Scourge. And from the point of view of Scourge's MRE, there's a single user there. From the point of view of Dargon's MRE, there's still a single user there, even though there are 2 users in the world. If, say, the MRE had attached a hat to one of the MREs had attached a hat to yourself, the other user still wouldn't see it because that doesn't not happening in his MRE. So just wanted to point that out. It can lead to some confusion. If you walk into somebody else's world and see your MRE running, that doesn't necessarily mean they stole it from you. That means you're probably running it on your local machine and you're just connecting to that. So keep that in mind going forward here. So, and this is just kind of a summary of what I said. You know, when you're in the local server, you might see your MRE in someone else's world, depending on what they have installed. If you deploy your MRE, one thing to remember is it's available on the internet. Basically, anybody with that MRE URL can add that SDK app to their world and add your URL to them and start running your MRE in their world. That's unfortunate. AltSpace provides no built-in security to avoid that. I know some of these, for instance, are for pay services. Some are, pay by the connection, those type of things. So do kind of think about that as you're going through these. And as you're sharing your URLs, you might want to just let people know, appreciate it if they didn't pass it on, something like that. If you are concerned about that, some folks are fine with sharing it. Ben shares several of his pretty widely, and he's fine with that. But again, there's absolutely no problem with anybody wanting to keep their MRE to themselves either and not share it with folks. If you don't want that to happen, you've got to do some coding yourself to avoid it. I haven't been through that. These are just, this is just an idea I had for how I might do it if I wanted to do something like that. That session ID, that bunch of random letters that automatically get added when you add the SDK app to your world. You might just, for instance, whitelist some of those and make sure to include those in your world. And then then you'd have to do it in server.ts, but check, the session ID of whoever connected to you and just close the connection if it's not somebody you want to talk to. That's the first thing that popped into my head. There may be other ways. I haven't really put my brain into it yet, but yeah, just keep in mind the only security AltSpace will give you is you just keeping that URL secret or the port number secret and varying it pretty widely. All right, so this is picking up where we left off last week. We had walked through attachments. We had attached the mules to people and so on. But again, one of the things we've all run into, if we've been to any of the parties at AltSpace, is that late joiner bug. That's kind of the terms that I think a lot of us have used for it, where who's ever there first can see everybody's attachments, but people who join later, sometimes you can see attachments, sometimes you can't, and so on. And the solution people say is just keep re-entering until it works, right? Which isn't the best solution, but that's not a bug in that helmet's MRE by itself, and it will happen with your attachments by default, and it's not a bug in anything you're doing. It's unfortunately a bug deep in the MRE code that's AltSpace's that we might be able to do something about if we dug really into their code, but it's very difficult to do. A workaround that I found that works either all the time or a very high percentage of the time, because I haven't seen it fail yet, but I haven't really done a lot of testing of it with a ton of people, is to do what I talk about here. As users join the world, you can go through and detach all the attachments and then reattach them. You don't see it blink out and blink back again. It's all in a single loop that executes really quickly. So it's not something anybody would ever notice, but it's something that has to happen potentially for people to see it. Now the catch is you have to think about efficiency with this. If you think about, there are some events here that use attachments. I think of the plays that have gone on, right? The Neverland, the Little Red and the Bandits, and the Agrabah that's coming up. That's something where it's a really popular event. There are a lot of people just waiting on it to get in because they know if they don't get in early, they're not going to be able to see it in VR. So a lot of people are sitting on it. So just as that event opens, you get just a ton of people coming in all of a sudden. If you did actually what it says to do here, when each user joins, you're going to have to do that potentially 50 times really quickly, if the world size is 50. And that's not very efficient. You don't really need to do it that many when you have a bunch of people joining at once. The other thing is world hopping, right? It's just pretty common to do world hopping, and somebody will set up a portal, and 10, 15 people or something will join to it. Or if you're on some of the world tours, it'll be like 30 who will join to it. Go to the world, and then all of a sudden you get 30 people in the world all at once. And you don't really need to do this trick that many times. You just need to make sure it happens sometime after everybody joins. So what I have here is I've developed a way to not only work around it, but to keep it reasonably efficient as it's going through here. So this is kind of the activity diagram for the fix here. Basically, the summary here is when somebody joins the world, it sets a timer. Then when that timer expires, it does a synchronization. If a bunch of people goes, it notices the timer's already going and doesn't start a new one. So if, for instance, if the timer's 5 seconds, then in that 5-second interval, however many users join, they'll get a single refresh. And the same thing will happen on that next 5-second interval if people are still joining and so on. So that really cuts down the number of times you got to do that detach and reattach. And the sequence diagram here kind of shows that. I left off users joining coming into the MRE server for clarity for this one. But really just from the MRE server to the app, you get user 1 joined. When that happens, the MRE app notices that no timer's running. So it calls a function called set timeout, which creates a timer that's going to go for a certain amount of time before it expires. During that time, while it's still running, user 2 joins, user 3 joins, user 4 joins. Then the timeout happens, and then you synchronize the attachments. That's when you do that detach and reattach I talked about. And then the whole process just starts over again. So when user 5 joins, another timeout starts because there's not one currently running. During that time period, a couple more people join. So after that timeout, you synchronize the attachments. So basically, the end result, the disadvantage is when somebody joins, if they're hit with that bug, they have to wait 5 seconds for it to clear. Well, whatever the timeout is, I tend to set it to 5 seconds. They have to wait however long that is for it to clear. But the advantage is that MRE app isn't just being pegged constantly and slowing things down because it can't process so many people joining at once. All right, so what I'm going to do now is walk through an example of doing that in app 5 here. So, all right, so this is, I'm just going to copy it over to here. Oh, did not mean to take that up so big. Okay, so, and another thing that I've done here, and I'm providing this code to you as well, that entire process that I talked about with the setting timeout and things like that, that's a little advanced. I don't really want to get into the details of how that works right now. But what I've done here, since it's something that's really common, is I've created this module called SyncFix. And I'll be uploading it today so you guys can use it as well if you want. And it kind of hides the more complex parts of that from you. The SyncFix function I have here, or the module, I've included some usage instructions that comment at the very top of it. And you see it's automating, automate the fixing of late join issues called without space. And so what I'll really talk through right now is how to use the SyncFix module. That set timeout and handling the timer and everything, that's all happening inside of here. And I've worked to kind of hide those details from the user of this one, since you don't really want to have to go through something that complex each time you create an MRE. But in general, you create an instance of this user SyncFix object. You call a function called add sync function, and that's what would actually do the synchronization, the detach and reattach in that sync function. And then in the app's user joined, you call another function, SyncFix users joined, and that's how the SyncFix function knows that a new user is joined. And then if for some reason you want to turn it off, I provide a way of doing that as well. So, but stepping through it in the app here. So okay, before we've already imported the MRE, so that's the standard import there. So here we're going to import All right, can people see the screen now? Okay, good. I see it hard. So, all right, so I don't know how far I got. I'll back up a little bit. And really what I was talking about is this SyncFix here. It's in the same directory as app.ts and server.ts. There's a function called syncfix.ts in there. I added that. What the / means is that when it's looking for SyncFix, it should look in that same directory as the other source files. So I'm going to import this is actually a class in there called user SyncFix. If I go back to SyncFix here and scroll down, it's importing this class here. Okay, and that's just like the others. It lets me actually use that SyncFix class while I'm here. Just a second, get around to the right keyboards. Got two keyboards I'm running at the same time here, and I keep switching the order they're in. Okay. All right. So, and again, remember when I'm doing these things, what I usually do. That relative preview. What we do is create a private in my class here called SyncFix, and I'm new out another one of those classes in my other module there. This parameter here is the number of milliseconds to wait. So 5,000 milliseconds, and that says 1 second, but it should be 5 seconds. Debugging my comments live here. So, all right, so we have the a SyncFix object here, and that is going to handle a lot of that stuff I showed you on the activity diagram a minute ago. All right, the attachments, remember that map we talked about last time, that's still got to be here. That's going to be important for what we're doing here. The constructor hasn't changed. So what I have here now is a new function called synchronize attachments. That's the bit I'm going to use for actually doing that detach and reattach. That SyncFix function or the module, when I set it up, it's going to automatically call this after that timer expires that I talked about earlier. So think of this as this is the function that needs to do everything it needs to do whenever that timer expires. So what I need to do here, and I have it in the comments here, but that this dot attachments, if you remember, that's the map that contained the users and the attachments that we used last time when we were talking about attachments. What we're going to do is loop through everything in there and detach everything and then reattach it to the same user at the same spot. So here we go. We're going to loop through. Of course, the constant is how you declare some variables. This dot attachments, if you remember, is a map. It has two items associated with it, a user ID and an attachment, or an actor that happens to be an attachment. That's what this syntax is here with the brackets. Is you loop through attachments, you're going to get the user ID and the attachment associated with it. So from here, we're going to pull off the attach point. So we're going to call the attachment here the MRE.actor. This is a little funny, but if you remember inside of MRE.actor, there is that attachment object. That's where we knew how to pull things off of. And then it's got an attach point inside of there. And just really quickly, I'll go through here. I did not need to sign up. Okay, there we go. So this is the spreadsheet with the API categories here. I'm going to go to the actor and then go to the attachment inside of here. Its type is attachment. And here's where we get that attach point. So that's something you can query. When we created the object, if you remember, when it was an attachment, we actually attached it to the user at the creation time. You can actually pull it out at any time via this method. So this is the actor, that attachment object, and then the attach point inside of it. We have to save that off because when you detach it, the MRE library will actually wipe out that attach point. Since we want to attach it to the same spot, we've got to remember where it was. So after that, we pull off the attachment called detach that disassociates it from the user. And then we call attach again. So then we have the user, and then we have that attach point that we pulled off before. So it's a pretty simple function. We simply loop through that entire map that we're maintaining. And remember, we're maintaining that map anyway. So that's not a lot of extra work. We simply loop through it, detach, and then reattach everything. And if you do that after users join, that seems to, or at least the vast majority of the time, it will get that user to be able to see all the attachments without having to do a re-enter world over and over. So the other thing we do here, so once it's started, we've got to initialize the asset container like we did before. This is the new bit here. Set up a synchronization function. So this synchronized attachments is that function we just looked at up here. It does all the attach and attachments in a loop. And the sync func is that object we created as part of this library. So it's that user SyncFix type. We're going to add the function, and then you see this syntax is basically the same thing as it's been for the on started, on user joined, on user left, all of that. It takes no parameters, and then you want it to call this synchronize attachments. And again, what this does is call that when that timer I talked about in the slides, in that previous page there, when it expires, this function will be called. But again, you don't have to worry about setting up the timer yourself because that's all handled inside that other function. So for user joined, most of it's just the same. We did this part before, the log the console, with the create from library. This is one of the mules. We attached them at the hips, just like before. We set the user and that the attachments, remember, is that map. So we associated that user with the attachment in the map. And then here's the one new thing we've added for this one. Whenever a user joins, we need to let that SyncFix object know that a user's joined. And that's as simple as calling its user joined object. Okay, so I'm getting a message that at least somebody's got a green screen. Can I see hearts for you can see it and sad faces for you cannot? Okay, most people can see it. If the person who can't, if you could re-enter world, you should be able to get in if you do just a straight re-enter. If you don't actually leave and come back, that won't work. But just go into your settings menu and re-enter world. That should get you going again. All right, so we have the SyncFix and we have the user joined. And again, that just lets the SyncFix function know that another user's joined. User left, there's nothing new there. It's just going to check if it has it and delete it. So you see it was adding just a few lines of code over what we had previously. And I really wish we had had time to go over this last week. So the previous version of this would have been fresh in your mind. But there really were just a few lines added to this one and that one function to call it there. Now, I'm not going to run this. There really wouldn't be anything to show anybody here because, oh, I'm getting some sad faces. Are more people seeing a green screen now? I see hearts for happy face and frowns for green screen. It looks like we got a mixture of them. Yeah, if the people who can't see it, if you could re-enter the world, that would help. Got a mixture here, and unfortunately, this projector, it's helpful, but it's still obviously a little buggy. Okay, and then in the user left, there's nothing new there. I'm going to give the folks who exited a chance to get back to the seat. But that's really the extent of it there. So it's a good bit easier to use. There's not a lot of reason to demonstrate anything here since we're all in the world right now. We'd have to get somebody to actually leave and come back for it to work. So I'm still seeing frowny faces. All right, people are still seeing the green screen. I'm going to try turning broadcast off and back on, see if that helps. Okay, so I'm getting messages that it's okay now from people. Hopefully it's gotten better again. So, all right. So, all right, switch back to here. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little, and actually we had a bit of a pause there. It's a good spot as any for stopping and asking for questions, since that was something that fairly new that we just went over here. So I'm going to open the floor for questions here. And those of you on YouTube, remember that you can type in your questions onto into the YouTube comment section, well, not the comment section, but the live stream chat, and they will be relayed here. Wanted to say that up front. I know you guys have about a 30-second delay before you hear that. So hand raises are on now. Are there any questions so far? All right. Looks like Elfir. Elfir. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. You should be on air. Should be there. Try it again. You should be on megaphone. Right. Maybe an experimental hand raise. Anybody else have a question? And good. I saw a message that the delay on YouTube is only about 10 seconds now. That's good to hear. And all right, looks like there are no questions right now. It's either very clear or I've completely lost everybody. So hopefully it's the first one. I'm going to go ahead and turn off hand raises. All right, and go ahead and continue here. So, all right, now we're going to talk more about customizing actors. So far, we've been able to bring them in. Everything's been we've used kind of the default for everything, right? We have not done anything with moving the actor around. We haven't done anything with making it bigger or smaller or rotating it or anything like that. But of course, you know, when you really start into these things, that's where a lot of the fun comes from. So this is basically how you customize actors at creation time. I'm going to just kind of point to this bit off to the right here. I really should have maybe clipped it off so we could have made that part a little bigger, but it's what I have right now, unfortunately. But you can use that actor attribute, which is the one we use for the attachments, if you remember. We used actor, and then there was attachment inside of here. But you can use it for a wide variety of things to customize with actors. Another one that's really common is this transform here. I talk about over here as well. I'm using one called transform and local inside of there, and I'm scaling. Hello world example. I believe this is the point where I've changed the artifact ID to something else. We'll see when I bring it in. But the scale here, instead of bringing it in full size, I'm scaling it in X, Y, and Z by a half, so it'll be half size. Now, this is one of the more interesting parts here. You know, if you have a kit object and just bring it in alt space the normal way, you know, via your kit items, you have a single scale item, single scale number, and that scales X, Y, and Z all the same. So here you could, for instance, scale Y and leave X and Z the same and make it tall or short or something like that. Then the X and Z can make it fat or skinny or whatever. So you can scale things individually in each direction, which can be an interesting thing to do and kind of fun to play with at times too. Basically, it's pretty straightforward here. If you actually know what these means, transform, the local, and then the scale. And again, they're scaled independently. So that actor transform, that's the transform is again one of the most common things after the attachments that you're going to want to do. And let me say, you can use both attachment and transform in the same creation, and that's very common as well. We'll talk in a minute about why you may want to do that. But there are two types of transforms. The local, oops, there we go. The local one is the one we looked at on the previous slide. It's basically relative to the object's parent. Now, we haven't talked about parenting yet, but when you create an object, another thing you can do is say it's a child of another one. So the other one becomes its parent. If that happens, then anything you do to the parent also happens to the child. So if you grab the parent, it moves the child around too. If you rotate the parent, it'll rotate the child relative to the parent as well. So it's a way of just kind of attaching one object to another. But the local transform basically means it's relative to that parent. If it's an attachment, it's relative to the attach point. So those horses were relative to our hips. If you put something in your right hand, it'll be relative to your right hand, which is why when you attach something to your right hand, for instance, as you move it moves around with you, if you remember seeing that, right? If you have an apple in your hand, an alt space or something like that, it moves with you. It doesn't just stay where it is. It looks like it's grasped in the hand. That's because the hand is actually the parent of it. Where that makes a difference is that position. At position, it has an X, Y, and Z value. If it's an attachment, for instance, it's relative to the attach point. So if you say attach it at 0.000, it doesn't mean 000 in the world. It means wherever that attach point is on that hand. Same things for hats and things like that. For those of you who have used that helmet MRE, you click on something like maybe a hat or something that goes on your head, and then you have some things that you can make it go up and down. That's what it's doing. It's adjusting the position of the local transform whenever you click that up, down, whatever. And you see it also has a rotation and a scale. The app, it's a little different. It's even if it is a child of something, when you create something and say set its app.position property, it sets it relative to the app or where the MRE 000 is, wherever you have MRE in the world. It'll also be relative to the MRE's rotation. I don't know how many of you have tried something like this, but if you, for instance, bring in an object with an MRE that's not an attachment, and then grab the MRE and move it, all the objects you created move with it. And if you rotate it, they kind of rotate around that MRE point. That's what's happening there. It's when it's not attached to something or not parented to something, it's moving relative to that location. One of the most disappointing parts of MREs when you try to really integrate them into worlds is that there's no way to find out where your MRE is relative to the world. So in other words, if you just create your MRE wherever you happen to be at the time and just kind of ignore it since it's going to disappear when users are there at the same time, and then try to align something with your template using the Unity coordinates, it's probably not going to work. It's going to seem kind of offset and probably maybe even rotated from where you were. The way I get around that is just if I'm trying to synchronize with something in the world, as soon as I bring in the MRE, I'll go ahead and edit it in the world editor and set it to position 000, rotation 000, and scale 1. The scale would affect it as well. If you do that, then your MRE coordinates and your Unity coordinates will be the same. The catch is, of course, you have to keep it there, and it can get a little convenient if you have multiple MREs and you're trying to do it at the same time. But that's really the best advice I can give you if you really are trying to align something. If it's strictly attachments, things like that, you don't have to worry about it. You can just let it go wherever it is. But if you're trying to align something to the world, it's important to put your MRE at the very center of the world and take away all rotation. All right, so I'm going to walk through and then demonstrate another example here, app 6, I call it. So I'm going to do here, and go to this app 6. And I'm going to walk through this. Now, this app 6 is based off of what was originally that hello world, or that simplified hello world I talked about before. So it's just going to be pretty simple there. So now one thing I've done for this, is you're going to see why I added this in a bit, but I've created what's called a sleep function. If some of you have used C, C++, a lot of other languages have a function called sleep. And basically what that does is just make the function wait for that long. So this sleep, I took a certain number of milliseconds, and it just waits that many milliseconds. Now, the catch is with an MRE, you don't really want to wait. You want to kind of work through what's called its event system. We're going to get into promises a little later on, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but basically this function is going to return something called a promise, and that promise will be resolved when the well, however many seconds you put in, or milliseconds put in, happen. So that's what's happening here. You'll see how to use it a little later on, and we'll get by the end of the course, we'll have gone over what it takes to really kind of know what's going on there. For right now, just kind of accept that it's in there, and I'll show you how to use it and actually get it to wait in something that won't lock up your MRE in a little bit as well. So, all right, so going back here, we've got our exported default class. We're going to create a kit item just like we did before. We need an asset container. In our constructor, we set up our started function. Again, this is all exactly like the original simplified hello world. In this one, so far it's the same. The one thing I've done that's a little different is I'm pretty confident I've changed that artifact ID. I'll run it in a minute, and you'll see what I mean there. I'll be bringing in a different object. It won't be that hello world object anymore. And then I've added, before we had just this straight resource ID, or a straight resource ID. Here, I've added an actor with a transform local. Local because I wanted to scale it in particular. I'm going to bring it in at half size. So when I bring it in, it's going to be half the size it would be if you just brought it in normally as a kit object. All right, and then I'm going to call, this is an async function. We'll talk about what that is in a minute. And we're going to call it to pulse the size of the kit item in a loop. So what this pulse actor is going to do, you're going to pass it that kit item you just created. Again, of course, created half size. What that function is going to do, and it's the next function in here, it's actually going to loop. It's going to call that sleep function to wait 5 seconds. And then every 5 seconds, if it's half size, it's going to change it so it's full size. If it's full size, it's going to change it half size. So when it's running, it's going to be half size for 5 seconds, then full size for 5 seconds, then half size for 5 seconds, and just keep going like that. I do give you a little warning here. This is not production code. I didn't want to complicate this too much. I can eventually talk about what it would take to make this a safe function to use in an MRE. For right now, I'm using it for example purposes. If you try using it exactly like it is in your world, your app will never exit. It's a problem that'll happen. And there are ways to work around that, but I didn't want to complicate this example with those details, but just wanted to give you a little warning to know that, hey, you do need to do something to this before you use it if you are going to use it in your MRE. Okay, so it's private. This is that async func. And the comment before I said call the async func. And then pulse actor. So, and then the runtime sees this pulse actor and sees that it's an asynchronous function. And what that means is it doesn't actually run it before it executes. Basically sets it up so it runs at an out of band with the rest of the code. So this is going to exit right away, even though the function hasn't really executed yet. and it'll kind of be executed in the background. For those of you who are familiar with threads, it's actually not a new thread. It's not a new process. It's part of the Node.js event loop, for those of you that are familiar with that. So it's all single-threaded, which has some advantages, some things that you look at that you might think would be a problem if it was multi-threaded. They're actually not a problem. So that actually does simplify things. But you do have to, at times, remember it is as well. So anyway, at this point, when it calls a function, it just exits immediately, and then started is done with, and it's just waiting for people to join. So at this point, I'm going to let the size equal to 1. This is one of the ways of doing an infinite loop in TypeScript. So this is just going to loop forever. The for loop, you usually specify an initialization, a test, and then an end condition, or an increment value, basically. If you just put this double semicolon in here, it's going to loop forever. So the first thing I'm going to do, here's that sleep function I talked about. But what I'm going to do is what's called awaited. That says, normally if I go back up to, I'm going to go back up to the sleep function for a second. You see it returns a promise as opposed to actually waiting for it. Wait basically means wait for that promise that's returned to resolve. And remember, that promise resolves after that many milliseconds. So the end result of this is the function is going to wait for 5 seconds, 5,000 milliseconds before it continues. Now, it's not going to lock up the MRE because it's running asynchronous to everything else. It's actually going to let other things run while it's waiting. And then here, I'm going to set the actor, that transform.local again, .scale. But this time, I'm going to set X, Y, Z to whatever the size is. And if you remember, I initialized it to 1. So when I brought it into the world, it's a half. Here, it's going to set it to 1. This as MRE.vector3. That's because if I hover over this, I don't know if that's big enough for you to read, but it's telling you that scale attribute is a vector 3. So it needs some way of knowing that what's inside this curly braces, you should interpret it as a vector 3, and that's what this thing does. If you don't do that, it's going to say, hey, that's not a vector 3. You need to tell me it is. And the easiest thing to do is when you get that error message, just say, oh yeah, I need to add that to it. That's my usual method. I hardly ever remember to do it in the first case. All right, then we set for the next size. So if the size is currently equal to 1, and TypeScript, I can't remember if we talked about this yet, but it's got this really weird triple equals to test for equivalences instead of double equals like you get in C, C++. So you got to do triple equals, then size equals half, so it's setting up so the next time the loop is going to set it to half size, else it's going to set the size equal to 1. So it's going to keep looping through that left and right. So what I'm going to do now is demonstrate it running. I'm going to 6, I believe, right? Yes. And that's just a function I use. I have all these apps here. That just copies it to the correct place. I'm going to do an npm run build, compile it. And unfortunately, the server is a bit slow, but we'll wait till it finishes. And if you remember, just like last time, this MRE off to your left is what you're going to, where it's going to eventually connect to this once it's running. All right. I pay good money for this server too, and it's a lot slower than my PC, but take what you can get. So npm start. So when it runs here, and it takes a few seconds to start up. There we go. So there we go. So should be able to see it getting big, wait for 5 seconds, and get small for 5 seconds. Now, the one thing that's nice about this, doing this as an MRE, is that all of us are connected to that same MRE. if this was an animation that was just there that you brought in via Unity, everybody would see it big or different at different times based off when they enter the world. Well, this is all handled in that same MRE, so we're all reasonably synchronized. We might be half a second off, something like that, due to different lags, but we're all basically seeing it big at the same time and then seeing it little at the same time. So this right here, just in case you're interested, it is the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. I don't know how many of you have seen my moon world, but I brought that model in as a let's see. So I'm going to, okay. So anyway, after that walkthrough and live demonstration, the next slide was going to be to pause for questions anyway. So let's go ahead and do that. And while we're doing that, we'll see if I can get something going, although unfortunately, I'm not optimistic about it, but go ahead and do the questions anyway. All right, so hand raises. So I think it's Ruzaki.
Yeah, that was last time.
Oh, it was last time. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, do you have a question?
Well,
I
was gonna ask you because I just joined this time and I did see the previous the week, so I was gonna ask you if you could just do like a quick rundown of the process of building your own MRE, because you already have the code and some type of like artifact item and all that stuff, and I'm just like where does all that came from?
Right.
Yeah.
So we've been recording these and posting them to YouTube. Did you get a chance to look through those?
I think I saw a couple of them, but they're like recorded from very far, very hard to see, very hard to follow, and the small letters, it didn't feel like something I could actually put something together. Also, I'm running on a Mac, so
so you're not seeing
you're using yeah, I cannot seem to follow the whole thing, and it all starts with using MREs is going to be a lot of trouble and a lot of difficulty, frustration, etc., etc. So I'm like, okay, so yeah. So a quick little rundown of basic setup. Like, okay, you design your models and you block them like this, or I don't know, however it's actually set up.
So probably the best thing to do, because it's going to be hard to do that when I can't display anything on top of everything else. Kind of the very first class, I did kind of a slow walkthrough of code and talk through what every line means. If you look at that one, that may help.
Did you start with the actual design of the model and where to upload it or how to call it and all this stuff?
Now, in terms of uploading it, that unfortunately is different for every single place you might deploy it. Now, I did talk about ways to debug it in kind of a local mode, which is where you run it on a machine in your own house. And you can connect to it from, your own PC you're on, or your own Mac would work as well. And also from in a particular mode from your headset if you have your firewall on your personal computer set up appropriately and things like that. But
okay,
I kind of suggest going through there, and we can
just are we building on Blender, passing them to Unity, giving them special names?
In terms of that, the kit items can come from anywhere. The MREs are just the code I've been showing you. The items themselves, those are just whatever you create, however you want to create it. It can be any kit item or any GLTF.
And those are hosted in
the kit items are hosted on AltSpace. The GLTF, AltSpace will host them, but you could do them elsewhere as well.
Okay. So you upload your model to AltSpace, and you get, I guess, that artifact ID, and then you get the code on your server.
The code is what you, right.
And then you get that address from your code to load up the items. Is this how it
Right,
works?
right. That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank
Okay.
you.
Oh, yeah, not a problem. Any other questions? All right, I'm not seeing any.
Jargon, I have a question. Karen.
Sure, go ahead, Karen.
Oh, so I was going to ask you on the started function. You have private started. On the official Hello World from AltSpace, they use async in there. They use the async function as part of the started function. And I was wondering, oh, thanks, Lance. Oh, see, I need
Yeah, if
to
you could go on
amplify
megaphone.
myself. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So on the in your code for the started function, you have private started. On AltSpace's official Hello World, they have the async function in there, and I was wondering. Obviously, we don't need it when we're implementing your code, but I wondered why they have it in their code, if it had anything to do with the animations.
It probably does there. What they're doing in their Hello World has a few things that are going to take a while to do, like loading that animation, and I think loading the GLTF takes a bit as well. So if it wasn't async, you know how sometimes you go into worlds, especially if they have MREs, and it seems to freeze for a second or two, then pick
Uh-huh.
up. That's when they're doing something that's taking a while outside of an async function. Our async
Okay.
is pretty small and it's bringing in a kit item. Theirs is going out to the internet and pulling down a GLTF and things like that. So I think that's probably why they made theirs async, to keep it responsive while you're doing that. That's very similar to, you know, the async function I just showed you with that the pulsating the actor where it gets big and small and big and small.
Right. Right.
If that one
Okay.
wasn't
Thank you.
async, it would lock everybody up.
All right. Thank you, Darkin. I appreciate that.
Yep, not a problem. Not a problem. All right, I'm going to check for questions one more time, see if I have any more hand raises. Not seeing any new ones. All right, if you guys are willing to hang around for a second, we'll see if we can get this to work. I'm going to completely exit out. All right, looks like we're going to have to call it a day again today. In terms of going forward, unfortunately, I was really hoping that not doing front row would fix the problem here, but clearly it's not going to. Got one other idea. I'm going to compare notes with somebody else who I know is crashing frequently in here as well. Try to work out something a little different so we can keep things actually moving for next week. But thanks everybody for coming. We'll go ahead and post this one again. It'll obviously be another shortened one, and we'll see where we can go from that. Appreciate everybody, and thanks for your patience. Oh, and thanks to all the mods too. They're an incredible help through all these issues, and could not do it without them. It's just been amazing. So, all right, thanks everybody.
Could someone please just write the YouTube channel where the videos get uploaded into the YouTube chat? Because I'm on the channel where just this live stream is on as a video, and the others aren't.
It's in the
I actually posted that if you scroll up.